Good evening. So, a lot is happening in the world, and last couple days have been pretty wild, locally as well. So, have a few thoughts to share tonight, and little update about the studio second cam for the artwork is in the works. So the next time you see a side by side presentation of myself and one of the sculptures, it will be upgraded. So stay tuned. Late night once again. And a few thoughts that I wanted to share, put out there. Also, keep on keeping on with the channel and push through various seemingly sabotaging influences. It's interesting how when you set a goal, there's a lot of clutter that becomes challenging. It doesn't want to be straightened out and ordered and sold and donated. I find that the more you set a new routine and new goals that are in the positive, a lot of things that you normally don't see start to surface to the top and try to pull you back down into daydreaming, distractions, blaming others for what goes wrong, etc. And at least not necessarily outwardly blaming people, but inside your head, the mind will. It's almost as if oftentimes there's a disconnect between what you want and then the conversation that you get from yourself as far as how that might happen, and then of course underneath that is a lot of subconscious stuff that you may or may not be aware of, attitudes, fears, self-limiting belief systems, particularly belief systems. And I would encourage people to experiment, go up against something that you believe to be true, but you've never actually tested. But baby steps. Don't choose an aircraft carrier right away. Go for like a cement mixer, or a coffee grinder. Something small that is achievable and will at least prove that you were wrong, and it's okay to be wrong. So one of the things I wanted to share tonight is, well, something on the sidelines about niches going out of style in society, which makes sense to me. And this is connected to YouTube and how YouTube is morphing and changing, and people are losing viewership and such. I feel like there's a saturation point. Um, what people, how people get what they need and involve themselves in, and also age groups, like how they identify with the world and how they get what they need and what they invest in as a form of self-expression. And as they grow older, those forms of self-expression will also morph and change. And what you thought you would love forever, you drop in a day. And so my sense of YouTube is that it's kind of like eBay. eBay's been around a long time. It's been doing what it's doing the same, pretty much the same way, way before Amazon morphed from being a book a bookseller to a behemoth, mom and pop store annihilator, Death Star, and and also movie producer, etc. So it's almost a country unto itself. Um, and so there's like going off of eBay, being consistent and always just what it is. I think that YouTube will eventually get back down to an essential level and some ground necessities will reaffirm themselves and also be born. And human connection, mental health, um, people organizing around issues, and perhaps even a kind of civil disobedience, gaining a kind of camaraderie that they need to support one another and their community or just themselves as individuals. I think this is going to be something very lucrative in how time is spent and the value of time, not necessarily money, but how time is spent and the worth of that time, the quality of that time. There's a lot of reactionary stuff in the world right now that is kind of like fast food for um, the the emotions, and but not, it doesn't really create much contemplation or change. It just simply uh, crying over spilt milk, but not looking at uh, the table that's angled that the milk keeps sliding off of. And I think YouTube has a lot of potential in being um, a social, like a serious social uh, center, and for world connection, not just clicks and um, soft cults of interest in the United States, but being able to speak with people from all over the world. And to get through the language barrier, you'll need AI to dub the voice in English, but with the same voice as if it's speaking English, and then vice versa. If you are hearing my voice in Arabic right now, or Farsi, um, then it would be as if I'm speaking Farsi. And I feel that AI could do that probably with a little bit of a delay, because there's going to be a few seconds to between the translation and the output. So there would have to be a way to seamlessly blend that into looking as if it's it's not happening. Um, but somewhere in Silicon Valley, I'm sure there's a group of psychonauts that could figure this out. Um, so there's some ideas. Put it out there. And yeah, just enduring the onslaught of uh, murmurings under the floorboard that will try to throw you off your game. And a few things about what Jung would call projections or transference, although the two have some distinct nuances that make them a bit different from one another, but it's pretty much the same idea of you have a belief system or unfinished business inside yourself, inside an attitude or a way of interpreting information, and you get triggered, and then you interpret that trigger as an offense, as most are, and then you have a reaction, a response, which I'm using the word response very lightly here because a reaction is not necessarily a response, but let's just call it that for the sake of moving forward here. So you put out a response, okay? And behind it is a story, a belief, a feeling, and yet you've asked no questions. You have no information. You know you've been triggered, but you have no idea whether the outside matches your inside. And what I mean by that is that when a person is triggered, it's like you open up a book in the middle. It's not your book. That is the person who has unknowingly or sometimes knowingly delivered the trigger. But you've opened up a book, an old book, depending on what the circumstances are. But ultimately, it's an old book because it belongs to someone else and they've been reading it their whole life. And out jumps the reader, and I would say 8.5 to 9 times out of 10 when someone is triggered, um, it's not intentional from the person delivering the trigger. It's something that simply rubs a person the wrong way, but you say or do the same thing with someone else, and the other person just simply looks at you and says, "Well, what do you mean?" Or "No, I think you're wrong, and this is why." Or they just say, "Well, no, that doesn't fit." Or sometimes they'll even say, "Well, yeah, that's true," and own it. Um, so healthy boundaries, I think, when you know uh, things about yourself, you can catch the trigger before it leaves your mouth, um, or your actions, and you can look at it and father it or mother it into a kind of pause, and then move forward knowing that you've been triggered, and not act from it, like as if you're in autopilot, and a totally different situation there. And so back to being triggered. A person is triggered, and from that book comes a story onto the person holding the book, delivering the trigger. And unbeknown to you, you've not read the book, but you're in it now because you're holding the book. You're associated with the book because you're in that person's presence. And they see you as a reader simply because you're holding the book. But you're not the reader. They're the reader. But deep down, they need company. They need camaraderie. They want attention. And that's normal. But how to get the attention and company is abnormal, because oftentimes when trauma projects outward and someone's triggered, it's negative, it's defensive and self-sabotaging. So my grandfather once told me, in order to be loved, you must show yourself lovable. And that's really hard to do in a world where oftentimes people hate to be loved. And it's seen as a threat oftentimes. If you're concerned about someone, it opens up vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities, if they've been exploited in the past as that person was a child, then caution flags come up, and there's a defensiveness around it, and that's also normal. But as an adult, if we're ever going to grow up and mature, every time we fail, it's important to remember that that was just one person, and to not let that become a pattern of belief that, well, if I fail with one person, that just means that I'm a failure, or I can't do it, or it's no one else. Humanity is not worth it. One person is hermetically sealed situation. Everyone is. Everyone is unique and one of a kind. So that means that if you're a 300-pound WWF fighter and you can't fit inside a smart car, that doesn't mean that all cars are not made for you. There is a Hummer out there made especially for you. You just got to find it. Get on CarMax or eBay Motors and search. It's out there. And there's not just one of them. There's hundreds, maybe even thousands. So that means you get to choose different wheelbase heights and tire brands and colors, engines, maybe even a lift kit with hydraulic stairs. So it's don't let the one God syndrome enter into your thinking about going on to the next person, because people aren't gods per se. We're participants, and we're along for the ride. And so keep trying. one thing I found out that is kind of interesting about shadow projection, where if someone gets triggered by something you've done, um, and they interpret it in a certain way, that no matter what you say, even if you're calm and collected and rational and reasonable, no matter what you do, you're wrong. And so the obstinance to not accept the explanation from the origin of the trigger, well, the origin of the trigger is the trigger, of course, which is inside the person who was triggered. But the origin spark or event that initiated the trigger, like push the button, the finger is not the button, but the finger is often imprisoned in order to conceal the button and keep it nice and shiny and bright. The button doesn't want anyone to figure out where its extension cord goes and how many amps the circuit breaker that extension cord is connected to is, and then who's the electrical company that services that main sub panel. So it doesn't want to be traced. It doesn't want to be questioned. And that's that's perhaps a deeper conversation into ego and persona and how we develop a self and the layers of the self, and then how that can be deconstructed by will, just pure will, taking chances, experimenting, being persistent, keeping a routine that's more positive versus chewing the cud and rolling around in one's misery. And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes misery is a cocoon, like an embryo of sorts. And depression can also be, well, not that misery and depression are that much different, but misery is, I think, a few octaves higher than depression. But nonetheless, they know one another really well. And often go fishing with no bait, which is a strategy to not reward each other with congratulations of what they've caught. So in this rejection of the intent to not trigger, the trigger itself, the button, maintains its identity. It will not hear reason. It will not accept truth as far as the person sharing what they were thinking at the time, what they were feeling at the time, what their intentions were. And that's the book on a page, reading from the past, projecting it onto the reader holding the book. And there's a strange logic there. It's almost as if, well, if you're in the company of a person and you do anything, say anything, which is normally the case with what we do with friends and acquaintances, but one or two things just happen to cross the wrong wires unknowingly, you're liable. And this is really rough stuff in the world because it plays on the world stages. It's playing now with Donald Trump in the presidency in Iran, where you have an illiterate man child dealing with PhD adults. Not a good combination. So in an adult world, Trump would see the reflection, see the contrast, and use it as a indicator of, like an alarm clock. I really need to get my shit together, you know? Like maybe I need to read up on Islam and ask more questions and not assume and um, and lie and pretend. Maybe I actually do need to read or have someone read to me my morning briefs. Um, but ultimately, what you have with Trump is a, a complete emotional uh, catharsis. He is in a mental health crisis, and he's been in a mental health crisis since he was first dubbed president, because he's not president material, and he knows it deep down. He really knows it, and he has been, uh, I would say, inwardly panicking ever since, because his life was much easier before. I think he's been bankrupt like 6 or 7 times, and um, money has bought him a lot of uh, artificial um, praise and smiles, but the substance is not there. And I feel like every human being feels substance. And if the substance is not there, weird things happen to people over time. Um, it's a tragedy. Trump is a tragedy, as is a huge portion of the patriarchy in the world, not just America, and the matriarchy as well, because substance is very rare, um, not just in this day and age, but in general. Um, it's it's a magical uh, material, and depth, dignity, um, nuance, a vibe, integrity, awe-inspiring. Um, these kinds of things come from, well, for lack of a better word, the soul. But I don't mean that in a religious way. It comes from something inexplicable inside a person, where they can gravitas, they can add something to something ordinary and make it extraordinary. Um, Certain poets can do it, um, musicians, storytellers. And so to summarize this idea of projection and transference, back to that, um, what I found is when you take that on, when you take on blame or an accusation and you believe it and you're offended and you react and you let that seep in and dig in and hook in, you become exactly what the projection needs you to be. Now, you can deny it, but it still hurts. You still feel it. That's normal. That's the echo of the shadow. That's the fingerprint or fingerprints it leaves behind. But if you don't keep participating and you don't give it fuel, it will eventually return to sender. And you'll still feel the loss and you'll still feel the bruise. But most importantly, you're not laid up in bed with broken limbs and missing parts and pieces and running around the rest of your life with one eye like Odin. It doesn't become a part of your identity. It doesn't it doesn't scar you for life in a sense. It may linger for a few months and it may become an old bad memory for the rest of your life, but that's not necessarily a scar. A scar is usually when someone believes that they've hurt someone. They really believe it, but they haven't. And it's just that their belief system doesn't have the tools to go into it forensically and prove it to themselves that they haven't. They believe it out of naivete or just simply ignorance of how these things work. Shadow procurement, where you carry someone else's baggage, and a lot of there's a few new age ideas around that, to kind of romanticize this, where there's an idea that you carry other people's loads and that's somehow heroic. And I think in certain contexts that's true, but in other contexts it's criminal. And how that all works its way out in the oxygen, oxygen-less void of space, I don't know. But there are people who are carrying around blame and shame that simply it's undeserving. They don't deserve that. But perhaps in some weird way, not that it's meant to be, but just simply of the fact that it's happening, it's teaching them something, one would hope. But when people are bullied, sometimes people exit the world by their own permission to do so, simply because they were bullied. And that's sort of the level I'm speaking about, where the shadow can be so strong and the psyche is so vulnerable and oftentimes lacking tools and support that the weight of that shadow is simply unendurable. So they become like a saint or a martyr of sorts. So ultimately, when you don't give energy to it and you simply say, okay, well, that hurt. That's unfortunate. Can't do anything about this. Won't try to do anything about it. Because it's like trying to be a good friend. If you're trying to be a friend, you're not a friend. If you have to try, that means there's something amiss. There's something off. Good friends just simply are. So it happens. It just happens. It flows. There's no trying. It's effortless. And so it's important that there's a level of surrender to how would I put this? Understanding, privately understanding a situation, but not proving it outwardly. Because the more you prove it, the more you try to prove it, the more you look guilty. And the more you trying to prove it, which could be an aspect of care, it's seen as defensive or, again, there are those who hate to be loved. And there's another phenomenon there I might remember to talk about once I get through this thought. So this hating to be loved, that's for a whole other conversation. But the gist of what I'm getting at here is that when you react to another person's reaction, that's exactly what the projection wants you to do. So it's just delivered to you like an upload from the book you're holding, a page, or maybe even a whole chapter. It's just uploaded all that into you as an offense or a kind of domestic crime of sorts where you're suddenly looked at and targeted as some sort of symbol or thing. And although you could prove that that's not true to the right adult who has an open mind and can get in behind their ego or behind the shadow projection and see it for what it is, you could reason and with diplomacy work things out. But if there isn't that separation in the other person, then the more you explain yourself, the guiltier you are. So the only thing you can do, well, there's a lot of things you can do, but I would say that at least in my life, what I've learned is to not become what your reaction to the reaction is wanting you to become in order to combat the reaction, the other person's reaction. So all the conversations going on in your head, all the things that you're thinking, oh, I wish I could have said that, or I would have said that, and I should have said this, and should have said that, and all these conversations starting to happen. These may not be your own. All these voices and ideas and attitudes, they may not be your own. They may be coming from an influence. And so spend time with it, quiet time. Don't jump on the first bandwagon. Wait for 12, 13, 16 of them to go by, and just feel it out and see how consistent these voices are after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. And you'll see most likely that they're not consistent. They will eventually simply go away. And which means they're not real. They're not really yours. But if you do react and you keep on keeping on, you become exactly what the shadow needs you to be. It's a kind of waste management situation. But you're not the manager. You're more the place things get deposited. And then you become like a living proof that that person was right, although they weren't. Because now you've imitated what their shadow wants and needs in order to become a surrogate for that trigger. And oftentimes people will remind people subconsciously of another person, and they don't know it. And this has been proven. I mean, simply in psychology and in day-to-day observation, that we search for lookalikes, trauma lookalikes, things that match or near mirror a situation that's unresolved from our past. And it could be a 60-year-old that has an unresolved issue that occurred when they were 6 years old. And yet that memory is still there, a kind of epigenetic library of sorts. And so when an event occurs that is similar or sometimes almost identical to the one that occurred 54 years ago, that individual who may be dead and gone surfaces, and a current person takes their place. The identity of that person gets projected into the lookalike, and for the person participating and being triggered becomes the lookalike in their head. Not actually, of course, becomes, but in their head, they are that person. So that's just one example of many. And so just something to think about, that if you don't become the reaction to the reaction, however you do it, I'm just talking about some things that I've experienced, but the gist of it is, the best explanations can fit in a fortune cookie. Don't be the reaction to the reaction. Now, however you do it, if you're agnostic, atheist, druid, Wiccan, goth, old school punk, uh, however you do it, whatever you are, whatever your material, go for it. But just keep the premise and it will deliver. Um, don't forget the Methodists, the Lutherans, the Baptist, the Judaic, the Muslim, the Christians, the Catholics. Did I say Lutherans? Probably. The Pentecostals, and not but least the Latter-day Saints and Mormons. So it's a human thing. Um, and if there's really any super, super old people out there, the Rosicrucians. You can't forget them. And the Kabbalists. And I know I'm missing another one. I just can't think of it. It's there, but maybe Gnostics. How we'll just throw the Gnostics in there too. And so it's curious. That's all. I mean, that's anything that becomes curious for me is worth talking about and giving it the benefit of the doubt that maybe there's more to it than just the obvious. And so when I see something that can be opened, it implies that there's allowance there, because if it can be opened, it's allowing you to open it. That means that if it's always been closed to someone else, that has more to do with someone else than it itself. So it gives some hope out there into the world that phenomenon that are occurring, that the psyche or the mind picks up on and is either victim to or believes a certain thing about and tries to nail it down as objective truth or universal truth or God's law. It's simply a perspective, an opinion. The thing itself is evolving and never in stasis. The only thing that wants it to be in stasis is the ego, so that it can claim it, call it what it is, rubber stamp it, copyright it, patent it, and make egoic monetary profits from. You can't, an egg cannot lay an egg. Not yet. It takes some time. And the ego doesn't like that. The ego doesn't like eggs that don't hatch, that just sort of live and say things, but don't necessarily become. They're either neither here nor there. It's sort of like a cocoon that doesn't deliver the moth or the butterfly, but it doesn't die either. It's just the imaginal cells having a conversation with someone who knows everything and is sure of themselves. And that imaginal cell can say some pretty weird stuff that challenges the ego. Um, so dipping off here, getting late, and I think that's pretty much it. I felt like getting on tonight and just riffing a little bit about some things have been on my mind and moving along. So thank you for supporting the channel. Please give a like and subscribe and share the channel. And I look forward to creating more videos around the sculptures and various other things that I want to share in the third dimension once the cam gets in, because it's going to be ordered tomorrow morning. And I figured out why my iPhone is not a good cam, and that is because the sensor is just simply not big enough in a smartphone to be what it needs to be. And that makes sense now on a mechanical level, because I'm a mechanically inclined kind of guy. So I understand those things, and I was missing a pragmatic detail there. And so the Sony Alpha that I have, the behemoth mirrorless camera, it has a huge sensor, and I just wasn't thinking in those terms, and so out I went to write the unknowing. So I look forward to sharing that with you. Thank you again, and good night.